After the long night, the Night's Watch devoted themselves to guard the realms of men, according to their oath. By realms of men, they obviously meant everything south of the wall. So as the wall was first being built, why would some men choose not to be part of the realms of men? Why would they choose to stay or go north of the wall? Why would some men reject the protection of the Night's Watch after they just saved mankind? Why would the first men divide themselves after a cataclysm that nearly rendered them extinct? Furthermore, if everything south of the wall was declared the realms of men, this is oddly excluding the realms of the children. According to the timeline we're given, the children of the forest were still alive and well south of the wall following the long night. It was only until the Andals came that the children had no more realms. In fact, the children and men worked together to end the long night. So why are the realms of the children absent from the protection of the Night's Watch? But here's an even better mystery that nobody has been able to explain. Why did the Starks, after the long night, kill the children and their greenseers in their war against the Warg King? Again, the men worked together with the children in the long night. So why would the Starks break this alliance and completely massacre the children who helped save them? This information comes from the archives of the Night's Watch, by the way, not from legends, so this is reliable. And this was definitely after the long night, because the Starks only came to be known as Kings of Winter after the long night. Now, we don't know how long after the long night this was, but this was when the Starks began consolidating their power in the north. As the next passage discloses all the other houses the Starks conquered after killing the children. Well, I have a possible answer to all these questions, and it's quite simple. It revolves around the long nights, occurring by the time the Andals arrived, which I've provided book evidence of in 4 separate videos. But with George himself implying the long nights may have been 5,000 years ago, I'm not really that worried. Now, to explain how the Andals explain everything, I am of course going to fill in the details with textual evidence, and it begins here. As you may know, the Kings of Winter had iron swords from the very beginning. They had iron swords when it was the Andals who brought iron to Westeros. They also had a crown made of bronze and iron. By the way, it is highly unlikely the first men had iron before the Andals came. The books have continuously told us the first men fought the Andals with bronze and the Andals fought with iron. And then the Andals kept winning every war, despite being outnumbered by the first men in some cases. How did they keep winning? Because they had iron and the first men did not. And then we have this line from the World of Ice and Fire, which explicitly tells us that the first men only replaced their bronze weapons with iron after some Andals taught them. So now that that's taken care of, let's continue. The Starks had iron swords and an iron crown immediately after the long night, because the long night might have happened after the Andals arrived. This would explain why the realms of the children are absent from the Night's Watch oath, because by the time the Night's Watch was formed, the children were already decimated by the Andals and driven from their deep woods, though not entirely gone as inferred by the war for Sea Dragon Point. Then, if the Starks did indeed have iron, this would explain how they dominated the north following the long night. They may have had iron while the rest of the northern houses did not. This would explain how they defeated the powerful alliance of men and greenseers of the Warg King. By themselves, the children are obviously weak, but allied with men, they are very formidable foes. In fact, if the Starks defeated the Warg King and the children because of superior weaponry, this is actually reminiscent of how the Andals defeated the children and the first men at High Heart, because neither tooth nor talon was a match for steel. So I've just provided a historical precedent for this to be a logical possibility. The Starks may have defeated the children and the other first men because they had superior weaponry, iron. But why would the Starks have iron while the rest of the Northerners did not? Well, the Starks may have simply had an alliance with the Andals. Why do I believe that? Well, they had iron for one, and there's a historical precedent for the Andals allying and teaching iron working to the first men. Plus, the Starks seemingly killed the last remaining children in the north, who the Andals undoubtedly hated. But the best piece of evidence I can provide for this alliance would be their crown made of bronze and iron. In the books, there's a clear symbolic dichotomy established between bronze and iron. We're told the first men fought with bronze and the Andals fought with iron. We're told the first men killed half of the children with bronze and the Andals finished the job with iron. More importantly, this symbolic dichotomy between bronze and iron is firmly established by the Oath of House Reed, as it lists bronze and iron among ice and fire, and earth and water. So there's a clear and established symbolic significance to bronze and iron. Therefore, there should be symbolic significance to the Crown of Winter, which is made of bronze and iron. Since iron has been symbolically tied to the Andals and bronze to the First Men, the Crown of Winter would best represent an alliance between the two. As you can probably guess, this alliance wouldn't sit well with some of the other First Men, which would play some role in them going beyond the wall, but more on that later. Why would the Starks be the only ones allied to the Andals? Well, consider this. The Long Night and the others would have threatened all men in Westeros, First Men and Andals alike, so it would make sense for the Andals to ally with the First Men. However, there have always been two central figures of the Long Night that led the Alliance of Men, the last hero and Brandon Stark. Whether or not Brandon Stark actually built the wall, the Starks are historically tied to the Night's Watch, and it was the Night's Watch who defeated the others and ended the Long Nights. However, it was the last hero who obtained the help of the children, which resulted in the founding of the Night's Watch in the first place. The show has already confirmed the last hero to be a Stark, but with the Starks being historically tied to the Wall and the Night's Watch in the books, it's always been a logical conclusion. Therefore, since the Starks likely had a leading role to play in unifying the men in the Long Night, they would ideally also be the ones who obtained the alliance of the Andals, thereby explaining their symbolic crown made of bronze and iron. In fact, it is actually said that bronze and iron were the metals of winter, strong and dark to fight against the cold. Since the First Men best represent bronze and the Andals iron, this could be alluding to their fight against the others, as they best represent the cold. Now, how does this all tie in with why some First Men went beyond the wall? Well, first, remember that the First Men of the North were never conquered by the Andals. However, their blood still slowly mingled with that of the Andals, and their old tongue only came to be spoken by the Wildlings beyond the wall, with many other aspects of their culture fading away. So, despite the Andals never conquering, they still permeated the North through their culture and customs. Again, this is something that would play a role in why some First Men went north beyond the wall. However, the spread of Andal culture in the North would be the best explanation for why the Starks killed the Warg King and especially the children. Let me explain. We've been told that the Free Folk fear skin changers, but they honor them as well. South of the wall, however, they are hunted down. So, Wildlings, who are descended from the First Men, do not hunt skin changers, but the First Men south of the wall do. This is crucial information, because the Wildlings serve as a sort of time capsule for how the First Men were before their culture was tarnished by the Andals. This is telling us that the First Men originally never despised skin changers. In fact, they honored them, presumably until the Andals influenced their culture. However, we have this ancient account of the Starks slaughtering skin changers and the children just like the Andals did. In fact, when the Andals came to Westeros, it is said they saw the children as demons and slaughtered them where they found them. This is probably why some Andals called themselves demon hunters. Furthermore, the only other demon hunters mentioned in the books are the ones residing in the forests of Masavi, which just so happens to be where shape changers also reside. It's pretty obvious that the demons these demon hunters are hunting are the shape changers, and Jojen Reed has confirmed that shape changer is another word for skin changer. With all this in mind, it is very likely that this animosity towards skin changers only came to Westeros with the Andals, since they saw the skin changers and the children as demons and called themselves demon hunters, just like the demon hunters who hunt skin changers in Essos. This would then explain why the Starks began a campaign against the Warg King, his skin changers, and the children. As said before, Andal culture permeated the north, and the Andals clearly hated skin changers and the children, so logically this hatred would be something the northerners would eventually adopt, especially the Starks. This is another reason why I believe the Long Night happened after the Andals arrived. The Starks killed the children and their greenseers, or skin changers, not too long after the Long Night, and this animosity towards skin changers seems to have been largely brought on by the Andals, which finally brings me to why some first men went north, beyond the wall. Imagine you're one of the first men in the north. It's the Long Night, which you know was caused by the Andals killing the children, destroying the werewoods, and breaking the pact. Imagine some first men become allied with these Andals. Imagine that after the Long Night, they even start adopting Andal culture, including this disdain for skin changers. Imagine that one of the most prominent first men kings forges a crown of bronze and iron, solidifying this alliance with the Andals. Finally, imagine that the Night's Watch would also be filled with the men responsible for the Long Night. Imagine these men would be the ones devoting their lives to protect you. Now, if you were one of the first men in the north witnessing this, wouldn't you be bitter? Wouldn't you think the culture of the first men wouldn't last? Wouldn't you think the worship of the old gods would be endangered? If some of the first men were already compromised by the Andals, this would no doubt lead to a rift between the northerners. This would lead to division, which is what I believe led some first men to go north beyond the wall, before even the Starks began killing the children. In fact, if some first men went north beyond the wall to preserve their culture, this mirrors exactly what happened in the Vale. When the Andals conquered the Vale, some of the first men survived by joining their blood with the Andals, but many more fled to the high valleys and stony passes of the Mountains of the Moon. The clans of these mountains are clearly descendants of the first men, who did not bend the knee to the Andals. Furthermore, there are similarities in their customs to the customs of the Wildlings beyond the wall. There in the Mountains of the Moon, the first men live short, savage, and brutal lives. Here in the history of the Vale in the Andal invasion, we have a clear example of the first men choosing to live in a harsher environment simply because they wanted to preserve their culture, refusing to submit to the Andals. So it makes logical sense that the first men of the north would do the same and choose to live in the harsher lands beyond the wall, because Andal culture clearly penetrated the north, and the Starks did start killing the children and the skin changers, which could only have been influenced by the Andals. Based on what the Starks did, some of the first men had every reason to believe that the worship of the old gods would not last in the north, despite the Andals never conquering. This is why I believe some of them went north beyond the wall, to preserve the worship of the old gods in case the north failed. Evidently, the worship of the old gods never entirely vanished from the north, but the Starks did start killing the children and their skin changers, so the other first men would have had valid concerns. Now, as to why and how the Horn of Joramun came into the possession of the Wildlings and why they wanted to go back south, I'm going to have to cover that in part 2. Now, here's some questions and concerns you might have. If the Starks allied with the Andals after the Long Night, why did Theon Stark fight the Andals during his reign? First of all, Theon Stark fought Andals who were straight out of Andalos, not Andals already established in Westeros, which is who the Starks would be allied with. Furthermore, Theon Stark wasn't one of the earliest kings of winter, even if the Long Night happened after the Andals arrived. Theon Stark lived long after it. We even see his statue in the crypts of Winterfell. Since he was one of the later Kings of Winter, this really doesn't contradict the notion that the earlier Kings of Winter may have been allied with the Andals. If the Starks consolidated their power in the north after the Andals arrived, why does the World of Ice and Fire say that the Kings of Winter defeated the last Bolton king just as the Andals were arriving? Well, that's why the theory is that events happened in a different order than were given. Just like Old Nan says the Long Night happened before the Andals arrived, she also says that the others hated iron, when it was the Andals who brought iron. The history of Westeros is full of contradictions, and with George making comments to make us doubt the timeline, it's logical to assume that the answer to these issues are resolved by a more refined timeline. All these questions here are answered in one clean sweep by the simple supposition that the Long Night occurred by the time the Andals arrived.